We have just wrapped up a 2-day powerlifting comp at my facility in Brookvale Strength Tribe. And it was an epic event, and it's led me to a point where I think that I need to put together a how to manage yourself like a pro powerlifting guide. Now, from the outside looking in, powerlifting can look quite intimidating. It can look like, quite a full-on sport. Now, if you consider getting involved in powerlifting, or you want to, progress into strength training, which everyone should be doing, you need to give this a listen. Now, trust me, I've been there before when I've looked at powerlifting, and, in my journey when I first started out, I was actually really hard against powerlifting. I was like, I'm never going to see myself as a powerlifter. I definitely wouldn't imagine that, 6, 8, 10 years down the track, I would own a powerlifting specific gym. More so to the point, when I first started my facility in 2019, it was set up in a way that we could have worked with people from athletic development, people from rehab, people from just general strength training and composition goals, and powerlifting. But the thing that really made it attractive was the community and the people that are involved in powerlifting itself. Now, let's break that out a little bit. So when you look at powerlifting, in an essence, it's just strength training. It's progressive strength training. And it's done over time in a way that's safe, in terms of maximizing your technique. It's effective because you get stronger, you build muscle mass, and you're doing it in a way that there's nothing that's too, hard and fast about it. It's really sort of long and slow. And with that, it allows you to build up the competency to actually handle these weights, for your body to get used to actually, executing technique in a good way, making the changes, giving yourself the feedback and learning from it. So powerlifting as a whole, really, there shouldn't be any sort of intimidation around it, because the reality is it's just structured strength training. And, in an essence, that's all it is. So, when we're looking at powerlifting in a sense, it's a sport at the end of the day, but, I often say to people, it's just the icing on the cake. The bread and butter of the sport itself is actually in the process of doing the sets and reps, showing up week in, week out, executing training programs over time. That is essentially what it is. And when you look at it like that, the comp day, regardless of your results, it's just a bit of fun at the end of it. Now, to add to that, there are quite a few very top-end competitive powerlifters that are like, this is my everything. I want to be on the world-class, lifting platforms around the world. I want to be competing against the best. I get that, but that is a very small component of the population that actually do compete in powerlifting. And, to that, last year at the Nationals competition that we were involved in, 50% of the actual group there it was around 50, it was either 49% or 51% were juniors and masters. So that's younger people that are getting into the sport of strength training, and elderly people who are, for the most part, just working on their health, longevity, building up some muscle mass, but are competing as well and having like a fun outlet with a good community. Now, if you're looking at jumping into powerlifting, I highly suggest you do it, because one, there's never going to be a right time. You are going to be, you're always going to improve comp to comp, session to session, year to year. You're always improving. So the best thing that you can do is throw yourself into that environment as soon as you possibly can, because the learnings that you get from being involved in it will far outweigh anything that you can read online or any training program that you can do by yourself at a commercial gym. Now, that leads us into today's episode. How do you, if you are getting involved in a powerlifting comp, manage yourself like a pro? Now, there are a lot of nuances, so I'm going to keep this as concise as I possibly can, and I'll try not to go down in too many rabbit holes, but there are quite a few things to get into. So I suppose let's break this into the first logical step is leading up to powerlifting comps. What you can do to maximize your performance, manage your own expectations, and just get yourself ready for the day itself. Now, when we look, probably the first point to sit and look at is your training program. And there's this real thing with powerlifting and strength training in general. People need to be realistic with the amount of progress that you're going to make. Prep to prep, block to block, year to year. And if you want to hit a certain number, say for instance, I wanted to squat 200 kilos, that's great to want it, but you need to have done the work in order to get to that end point. So wanting something versus actually earning it are very, very different. So when you look at your training program, you have to be present with where you're at, and you have to progress yourself in a way that's going to allow it to be sustainable. So you don't want to push things way too hard, way too quick, potentially put yourself at risk of an injury, potentially burn out and, not enjoy the sport or not enjoy training just because you've pushed too hard too soon. Every single year that you train, even if you're not competing in powerlifting, you get better. You should be refining your technique. You should be refining every process that you do. So slow down a little bit, sit in the training program and manage your own expectations around, how quick you want your progress to be. Now, you will get progress when you've earned the right to do so. So what you'll often find with people with lifting is they'll simmer for a bit of time and then they'll get like a little run where, the lifts go up, your strength goes up, your ability to handle, a larger amount of weights for sets and reps goes up, and then it will slow down again. It will plateau out a little bit and it'll kind of simmer again, and you get this strength increase in waves. So being mindful that it's not this linear sort of just upward trajectory is really, really, really important. Now, the next thing is knowing and understanding. You don't have to know every single rule, but knowing the rule book of the federation that you're competing in is very, very important. Now, there are some sort of industry standard or powerlifting standards, such as, pausing your bench press on your chest. We know what a pause is. It's bar being motionless. With a squat, we know what squat depth is. Deadlift, we know what a deadlift lockout is. Now, within all these different federations, there are small nuances within the rule book. Some may allow certain type of apparel or clothing, t-shirts, soft suits, all the different bits and pieces that you wear during comp day to be worn. So you may have one federation, for instance, the federation that we primarily work with, APL, they've changed their rule book where you can actually have your thumb loop on your powerlifting wrist wrap, where in a lot of federations, you're not allowed to have that thumb loop touching the bar. So there's small nuances within all these different types of federations, and there's a lot of them. So knowing the rules of the federation will allow you to not miss lifts or get red lighted for really simple and easily fixable mistakes. All these resources are available online. So, a month out from your competition, 2 months out from the competition, really get a good grip on the standard, get a good grip on what you can wear and how you need to perform on the day. And if you have any questions leading up to, just make sure that you absolutely nail it ahead of time. Reach out to the people, ask the questions, get validation that you know that you're on the right track, because you see a lot of people, especially newer lifters coming into the sport, and they just unfortunately get red lighted over really silly mistakes that could have just been, easily avoided. But the reality here is these are good learning mistakes as well. Now, I made a post about this the other day, but I think being realistic about how much you're going to peak in comp is something that, I think starting out in powerlifting, you get this false sense of how hard you can push and how quickly, because the first comp you get into, generally speaking, you'll probably exceed your expectations. You're motivated by the day. You're nowhere near your strength potential yet. And you may add 10, 15% to what, increase into what you thought you were going to hit on the day. Now, as you get better and better and better, the amount that you peak each comp actually gets smaller and smaller. Now, that sounds a little grim, but just to put this into context, if I was able to squat, say 200 kilos, a good peak would be somewhere between 1% on that, which is 2 kilos, or 5%. Which is essentially 10 kilos. Now, if I hit anywhere between, say, 202 to 210, that would be a really good outcome in comp. I think sometimes we go into these comps being a little bit unrealistic about how much, a deload into comp is actually going to provide. Which brings me to, in training, you also need to leave enough room for you to actually move and peak into comp. You see a lot of people absolutely sending their squats, their bench, their deadlift in comp. And honestly, you look at it and they're like, that was an 8 RPE. And I'm telling you, it was a solid 12.5 RPE. There's no way you could have got another rep out of that. So you need to be realistic as well. Like if you hit your squat, your bench, and your deadlift on separate training days under perfect conditions, and it was really hard, you probably couldn't have done another rep. Could you actually get all 3 of those lifts together in one competition under comp standards and actually pull that together in one day? The reality is probably not. But if you simmered your training to a point where you've really you've built the technical proficiency, you've built everything up, and you know that, say, your last heavy training sessions, you hit, a 9 to a 9.5 RPE, but you could have done more, you know that there's room to move on comp day. So you're probably going to have a higher end of that peak rather than the lower end. Then the third thing is weight classes. The fourth thing, is weight classes and frequency of competitions. So when we look at competing, I suppose early on, you'll want to jump into quite a few comps. You'll be quite motivated by it. The experience is invaluable. You're going to learn so many lessons along the way. So I think jumping into some comps and just refining your ability to get into comps, to manage the day, to manage your own energy throughout the day is really important. But as you get better and better and you get stronger and stronger, you actually need to pull back a little bit and do a bit less competing because you need bigger time allocations to training itself. So initially, I would say jump into a few comps across a year. Don't burn yourself out, but just get the exposure to the environments. It's not like you're going to be, pushing to 100% every single comp because you don't know what your true strength potential is. So, get into it, experience the environment. It's probably going to provide so many valuable lessons and learnings along the way. That's like, why not? Then once you've got to a certain point that you're comfortable with, spend some bigger time chunks working on like your base strength, your quality of movement, bringing up weak areas. And then you can spend time actually peaking and, seeing what the real results of the previous or the prior work was. I think, early on, you just get frequency, get exposure, and then, slow things down and spend more time actually training rather than competing. That's the way to look at it. Now, there are different strategies around that. Like, as an advanced lifter as well, you may have a competition schedule that there are quite a few comps that you want to do within a year. So you may have to get a little bit strategic as well about which competitions you do and which ones you pick for. So say, for instance, you had a qualifying comp for nationals that you had to do to put up a qualifying total. You may then go, well, I'm only going to do like the bare minimum at that comp. And then I'm going to put up the total so that it doesn't take away too much training time. And then I can get back to training the following week. So that's actually a very smart strategy as well. But the standard of powerlifting is, it's getting higher and higher. So, these local level comps now, you're actually having to work really hard in order to secure your spot at these events as well. But being strategic with the comps. Now, my wife, great powerlifter, we had a period of time where she did 4 comps, I think it was in 14 months, and 2 of them being international. And, it was a perfect example of we had to be really strategic about when she peaked, and we had to be like, no, we're just ticking a box at this particular comp. And I think that's just something to note, that not every comp needs to be a PB. Not every comp needs to be your best performance, especially if it is a qualifying comp as such for, say, a national event. Which then leads me on to one more thing before we move into the next section is, sometimes you're not just chasing totals and PBs. You're chasing competition. So if you go to, say, a national level comp, you may find that you do not actually have your best day on the platform there, purely because you're there to win. So you're there to secure points, or you're there to try and get yourself onto the podium. So it's like, well, okay, well, I'm actually going to play a bit more of a strategic game here. And I'm going to go, okay, where can I maximize points so that I put myself in the best position when it comes to, say, deadlifts to actually pull to secure my spot on the platform, hopefully win, but, maybe first, second, or third. So not every comp has to be a full send, whether it's just from a qualifying standpoint or from a competitive standpoint. Now, on comp day, I suppose this is probably the one that if you haven't competed in powerlifting before, this will sound a bit strange, but bear with me. And if you haven't been to a powerlifting comp, go to a powerlifting comp. Now, on comp morning, there will be a handover from the person that's running the comp or someone that's involved in it, just sort of explaining the day, the logistics, all that sort of stuff. As a lifter, it's wise to be there. It's generally done like 45 minutes before lifting kicks off. So say lifting started at 9, at 8:15, there's generally like a lifter's brief. Now, that's your opportunity to ask any questions that you haven't gotten finalized, like specific rules, specific, apparel or, clothing that you want to wear, or any sort of the technicalities around the lifting equipment. That is your opportunity. So if it's your first time competing, I would absolutely be there. Now, how the day actually works. So we have what we call flights. So you might have flight A, flight B, flight C. Flight A will do all their squats. You get 3 attempts. Flight B, same again. Flight C, all again. Then everyone moves on to bench. So it's very sequential. It'll go squat, then bench, then deadlift. But you as a group need to know when you need to start warming up and getting ready. Now, flight A, the first flight of the day, they essentially get a bigger window to warm up because they have all the time before the lifting kicks off to get ready. As soon as flight A starts lifting on the platform, the flight B that's coming in after them, that's when you start to warm up. Now, you generally get about 30 to 40 minutes to get to your last warm-up weight before you get onto a platform. But what I would say is allocate yourself 30 minutes, and as you're leading up to the comp, start to train in that way as well. Start to train in a way that's like, okay, it's going to take me 30 minutes to get to my top set so that you're ready. There's no changes to how you warm up. There's nothing left up to chance. You've basically controlled all variables. So you give yourself 30 minutes, and if you logically think about it, it's a set, every 5 minutes, and you might do a few more at the start, but essentially every 5 minutes you're jumping through a set, and you're getting yourself ready for the next one. Now, you might have on a bit of equipment, say you're using a combo rack or a mono lift, you might have 4 to 6 lifters all working into that. So you need to then be mindful of the people that you're warming up with. And, say you had 3 racks in the warm-up room and you had, 15 lifters on the platform, you would ideally break that into 5 people on each rack and you all warm up at the same speed. You need to have a little bit of like etiquette around how you warm up because there's nothing worse than, say I just squatted and, I've worked up to say 180 or 200 or something like that. And then someone jumps over and goes, hey man, can we strip the bar back down? And you're like, come on, man. Like we all warmed up together. We've all been here. How about we all warm up in a logical way? So when you're in the warm up room, go around to people and be like, what's your last warm up weight? Or what are you warming up to in the warm-up room? When you know that, then also look at similar heights because it saves time in adjusting the racks. So that there will save you so much time and so much hassle because you just warm up really effortlessly together. It's just such a simple process. That's the opportunity to also meet people. If there's any sort of, technical changes that need to sort of be worked on, you've got spotters there with you, and it just creates a little bit of community and vibe in the warm-up room because when you come into a powerlifting comp, the first lift of the day, squats, is normally like, there's a lot of rack height changes. There's a lot of weight changes. There's just a lot going on. There's a lot of nervous energy. So get in, get systemized, attack your squats, and then the rest of the day is actually very simple. But, from a spacing allocation, you have about 30 minutes to get yourself to your top weight so that you can then get yourself ready. Now, your last warm-up weight, you want to time it where you're about 5 minutes off your first attempt on the platform. So in powerlifting comps, there's a TV in the back screen. Up on the screen, there is a run sheet, and you can basically have a look at it and see how many lifters. And if you allocate a minute per lifter, you've basically got yourself your 5 minutes. So warming up, getting yourself prepared and leaving yourself enough time is very, very, very important. Now, with the next thing is attempt selections. So with attempt selections, you want to be making a bigger jump from first attempt to second attempt and a smaller jump from second attempt to third attempt. You definitely don't want to do it the other way around, even though I do see that from time to time. You want to start off on something that's really quite conservative and easy for you to do. Say a 3 to 5 RM, and then you want to make a bigger jump. Now, let's just put a number around this. For squatting, you may make a 10 kilo jump from 1 to 2, and then from 2 to 3, you might make a 5 to 7.5 kilo jump, depending on how well your second attempt moved. With bench press, often you'll find that the jumps are a lot smaller. So you might make a 5 kilo jump, for instance, from first to second, again, depending on how strong you are. And then second to third, you might only make a 2.5 kilo jump. And then on deadlifts, you'll often find that the jumps between are often a lot bigger. And you might make, a 20 kilo jump from first to second, and then 10 kilo jump from second to third. Now, these are all things that technically speaking, this is how you warm up in a training session anyway. So, you know what numbers you're very comfortable with. Like, if my aspiration was to hit a 200 kilo deadlift, I may open with 170, go to 190, and then go to 200. That's a really logical sort of, sequence to get there. But, you definitely don't want to be too high or open too high either, because that limits your ability to make jumps, but it also then it's unnecessary fatigue. So in training, and leading up to the comp, you'll start to get a really good idea of the types of jumps that you do. So don't change anything on training day, and, go through the process that you would normally do in training and feel it out. And, with all of this as well, before you actually take your first attempt, you can change that attempt. You generally have 5 minutes before lifting starts to drop your attempt down or push it up. So put numbers in that you're very comfortable with and that don't scare you. That is my biggest thing, because if you don't get that first lift on the board, you cannot go backwards. And then that means if you don't get one successful lift in squat, bench, or dead, you're out of the competition. So start on something that you know you can do and then make jumps as able. It's a very, very easy way to make sure that you get on the board, because things happen. Now, comp day itself, there are things that happen outside of your control. It's just, you can't plan for every variable. We have judging, and we try to have a process as to how it's done in a objective way, but you've got to understand there's people that are judging this. So it's the best of 3 judges. Probability of that makes sure that it is and should be a good call on the day. So that is the thing, but you cannot control how people act, and you cannot control the way that people are going to ref. You cannot control how long the press commands are, what someone thinks depth is, the music that's on, the people that surround you, the equipment that you're lifting on. There's all these variables that you cannot control. So what you need to do is figure out a way to deal and manage with things that you do not necessarily have control on. Now, how I personally manage it and how I teach people to manage it is by owning your process, the way that you warm up, the way that you approach a bar, the intensity that you put into it. They are all things that you can control. If you know the rules, if you know your training technique, you can absolutely dominate the training powerlifting, the training component, and then the powerlifting platform, because you're so confident in the way that you execute, and it removes a lot of the external variables, and you can just black everything out and you can just go and get stuck into it. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about is, before wrapping things up, is managing your energy across the day. Now, I think for everyone, this is a very unique area. Some people want to get really hyped for a lift. Some people like to conserve energy and just kind of do their thing and then, put energy into the bar. As you progress as a lifter and, as you stack more of these days and these competitions up, you're going to start to understand what makes you tick better. Now, some people like a back slack, some people like ammonia. Personally for me, when I first started powerlifting, I would get, pretty angsty, a little bit emo, and, I'd sort of, get into like a bit of a weird state. But then I realized that it was actually taking I'm so process driven with the way that I do things. So what it was doing was actually taking my energy away from the output and the energy that I could put into my actual processes. So I was finding I was quite tired, coming up to deadlifts, because I'd wasted so much energy during the day. So I actually got to the point when I was lifting that I didn't even listen to music until just before I started to get ready for my lift, because all that stimulation all day actually took a lot of my energy. Caffeine consumption and stimulants is something that also needs to be considered. You don't want to wake up at 6 a.m. and absolutely peak your caffeine straight up in the morning because you're going to crash. You want to simmer things across the day. So before each lift, you may decide to have a little bit of caffeine, some food, some quick glucose sources, some lollies or whatever that is. Or, if you've got a bit more time in the day, you might have a meal between squats and bench. But you need to figure out an eating routine that works for you. And that's going to be very individual to each person. But what I would say is you want to be using quick carbohydrates. You don't really want to be having big, heavy, fatty meals that are going to slow down your digestion. On comp day, it's all about performance. It's not about building anything. It's output. So you don't need to, hit a protein macro target on that day or a fat target. You're there for performance. So managing your food, managing your caffeine intake, and managing your energy across the day in terms of, stimulation is really, really important. And, you can see people have an absolutely perfect prep, but, they let themselves down on comp day because they're overstimulated or, they give too much energy to other people as well. And, that's probably my last bit of advice on that is, with your energy, just watch. It doesn't mean be rude, but just watch who you actually give your energy to on comp day. Do your own thing. You're there with you doing your thing. So yes, you want to converse with the community, but be mindful that you also need to be able to show up for yourself because at the end of the day, you're the one doing the work on the platform. So whatever zone you need to be in it because there's no judgment. It's a day and an opportunity for you to do what you want to do. So I suppose wrapping things up, there's a lot of variables and the only way that you're really actually going to get good at it and really understand it is by throwing yourself into it. Now, this isn't just targeted at newer lifters because there's a lot of advanced lifters that, to be honest with you, could deal with, refining how they approach comp day. They could have a little bit more finesse or a little bit more structure in the way that they do things. But newer lifters coming into it, throw yourself into the sport. Have fun on the platform, take the lessons from it, knowing that not every single, comp day is going to be perfect, knowing that there's always going to be room for improvement, but more so to the point, knowing that you're never going to be fully ready. So if you're considering doing it, I would absolutely encourage you to sign yourself up to a comp. Now, before we wrap up, we have a heap of members at our gym, right? And I would say 70 to 80% of them that compete would not actually call themselves a competitive powerlifter. Like I was saying at the start, it's just a really fun endpoint for these people to work towards. One, it keeps them, for lack of better words, motivated working towards an endpoint. But two, they actually get to see, there's delayed gratification, but they actually get to see the results of the training that they're doing. That's amazing, and it's structured. It's a focus on, progression. It's a focus on technique. What's there not to like, right? So when I think of powerlifting, what I think of is structured strength training. And I absolutely love that because that's what it's all about. That's just the icing on top that we get to do in a great community with really, really fun people. So that's it for today's episode. I'm going to wrap things up there. I'll see you guys on the next one.